History books often tell us that when the Spanish arrived in the Philippines in 1521, they easily conquered the islands with superior weapons, armor and ships. But you know, the real story is far more complex, and honestly, far more shocking. Because when the conquistadors set foot on Filipino soil, they were stunned. They did not find a weak and helpless people. They found warriors, armed with weapons so unique, so deadly, and so advanced for their time that even the Spanish, armed with cannons and muskets, were taken aback. Today, we are uncovering the forgotten arsenal of the early Filipinos, the secret weapons that shocked the Spanish and proved that the islands were far from defenseless. Let's begin with the Kampilan. This massive two-handed sword was unlike anything Europeans had seen. Stretching over 3 feet long, with a single edge widening near the tip, the Kampilan was a weapon designed not just for battle, but for intimidation. Chroniclers describe how warriors of Mindanao and the Visayas wielded these blades with terrifying skill, capable of cleaving through shields and armor. The Kampilan was so fearsome that even the mighty conquistadors hesitated to face it in hand-to-hand combat. In fact, legends say that the great hero Lapu-Lapu himself, the first Filipino to resist Magellan, fought with a Kampilan at the Battle of Mactan. While Magellan carried a sword and shield, Lapu-Lapu's warriors struck with these gigantic blades, proving that European steel was not invincible. Next is the Barong, a shorter but equally devastating sword. Heavy and leaf-shaped, the Barong concentrated enormous cutting power. Spanish soldiers quickly learned that underestimating a warrior with a barong could cost them their life. Its weight and sharpness made it ideal for hacking through both armor and flesh. To the Spanish it was a brutal, almost savage weapon, but to Filipinos it was a symbol of status, courage, and strength. Then there's the Kris, a blade as much spiritual as it was practical. Wavy, razor-sharp, and often decorated with intricate carvings, the Kris was believed to hold mystical power. Warriors of the South carried it not just as a weapon, but as a sacred object tied to honor and ancestry. Spaniards were baffled by its design. To them, a wavy sword seemed impractical. But in the hands of a Moro warrior, the Kris could cut, thrust, and slash in unpredictable ways. Many conquistadors fell to this mystical blade, and their writings show both fear and fascination for it. But Filipino ingenuity didn't stop at swords. The islands were also home to advanced projectile weapons that shocked the Spaniards. Take the Sumpit, or Blowgun, which used poison-tipped darts. Silent, deadly, and invisible, it allowed warriors to strike from a distance without being seen. Spanish records describe entire groups of soldiers collapsing after being struck by what they thought were harmless scratches. They had no defense against poison extracted from plants and animals. Toxins carefully crafted by Filipino tribes over centuries. Equally surprising was the bolo, a farming tool turned into a weapon. While not as glamorous as the Kampilan or Kris, the bolo really symbolized the Filipino ability to adapt and fight with whatever was at hand. To the Spanish, seeing ordinary farmers rise up with bolos and actually defeat armored soldiers was both shocking and, honestly, pretty humiliating. And perhaps the greatest shock of all? Gunpowder. The Spanish thought they were introducing firearms to the islands, but archaeological evidence and historical records suggest that certain Filipino groups were already experimenting with gunpowder weaponry, learned through centuries of trade with China, the Malay world, and Arab traders. The Lantaka, a type of small bronze cannon mounted on boats or fortifications, was a Filipino innovation. These cannons were often beautifully decorated, cast with local designs, and used both at sea and on land. When the conquistadors faced Lantakas firing at them from coastal villages, they realized Filipinos were not strangers to advanced warfare. So, why don't we hear about these weapons? Because, you know, history is usually written by the victors. Spanish accounts often downplayed Filipino strength to justify their conquest. Yet their own diaries and letters betray the truth. They actually feared Filipino warriors. The Battle of Mactan proved that European armor and muskets were not enough to guarantee victory. It took centuries of divide-and-rule tactics, alliances, and brute force before Spain could finally claim control. But the weapons themselves tell us something deeper. They show that the Philippines was not a backward, isolated land. It was a crossroads of cultures, technologies, and ideas. Filipino blacksmiths were master craftsmen, and warriors trained from childhood. Communities developed both the weapons and the skills to resist foreign domination. The legacy of these weapons continues today. The Kampilan, Barong, Kris and Bolo are not just artifacts in museums. They are symbols of resistance, identity and Filipino pride. They remind us that when the Spanish first arrived, they did not find an easy conquest. They found warriors ready to fight for their land. So, the next time someone tells you that Filipinos were primitive before colonization, remember the shock on the faces of the Spanish conquistadors. Remember the swords that could shatter armor. Remember the cannons that fired from bamboo rafts. And remember the blowguns whose darts carried silent death. The Philippines was never defenseless. It was fierce, it was resourceful, and it carried weapons that the conquerors would never forget.